Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Thanks so much for tuning in tonight. Tonight is Woke Wednesdays. We do this every single Wednesday at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. My name is Herson, and I am the host of Woke Wednesdays. I'm also a PhD student at FIU here in Miami, Florida. And tonight we have the pleasure of having some amazing individuals on the show. Would you like to introduce yourselves?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, so I'm Leanne Weeks, and I'm a feminist activist for Black women's rights.
And my name is Jasmine. The work I get paid for is the Staff and Policy Director at the Miami Workers Center. And then on the side, I do a bunch of other work. I sit on some boards. I believe Black Lives Matter. I fight for Black women. All the things.
Awesome. Do you also identify as a feminist?
I do.
Do you?
I do, a Black feminist. I do.
Interesting. So maybe we can unpack that a little bit.
Okay.
So tonight we're talking about the abuse of Black women. If this is your first time tuning into Woke Wednesdays, we do this every single Wednesday. Please feel free to ask questions, pose comments. These young women are very knowledgeable on these issues, so please feel free to just ask whatever you would like. And let's go ahead and jump into this. I am interested in this feminism question because there are different ways of identifying, different definitions for it. Womanism is also a thing, so just curious, like, what does feminism mean to y'all? And maybe also in relation to Blackness.
Right. So I think that to talk about the answer for that, like, there's a lot of history tied to the word feminism, which we know of. A lot of that history caused a rift in feminism many years ago when we talk about the suffragettes and folks fighting for women's rights that seemed to exclude Black women. Well, not seem to, it did. Like, it excluded Black women. Ida B. Wells was told that she had to march at the back of a women's rally. So, like, when they were talking about equality for women, it was not including Black women. And there was a move of folks talking about Black feminism and a feminism that encompassed not just women at the top, but all types of women. And I would say, I mean, what we say now is when Black women win, we all win. So that's the type of feminism that I believe in. That's a feminism that centers the experiences of Black women, because you can't talk about equal pay and say, like, oh, a woman makes this much compared to a man, without saying that in Miami-Dade, a Black woman makes 63 cents to a white woman's dollar. Right. So, like, those are the things, like, it's not all the same for all women. You can't talk about any of that stuff without saying that trans women have an average income of $10,000 a year.
Wow.
Right? So you have to break it down in those ways, and I believe that Black feminism includes all of that.
Dope. Thank you.
Absolutely. So I definitely agree with Jasmine on that one. And even today with third wave feminism and talking about inclusion, you know, it's a great buzzword to include Black women, to make sure that Black women are a part of the movement, but not actually addressing the specific issues that are unique to us. Even in relation to this topic, you know, how we're treated by the police when we report abuse, how we're treated by our peers. These are not really discussions that the general feminist scope is privy to, because they don't really think about much outside of themselves. We're all, as human beings, we're naturally self-centered. So that's why Black feminism is particularly important, is because it sheds light on those unique issues that we can address those, because if equality isn't across the board, we've accomplished nothing.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think this also relates to tonight's topic, right? So we're talking tonight about the abuse of Black women, which is a very important topic. It's something that has been happening for centuries. So how can we kind of think about this? Why focus on Black women? You said something that when Black women win, everyone wins.
Right. We all win.
Which it includes men.
Right.
So why focus on this? Like, so what kind of prompted that statement? Because I think you make a great point.
So I mean, if we think about Black women, and even including indigenous women, and all the oppression that is on top of us. So we have the oppression of racism, of patriarchy, of class, of all those different things. If we can focus on solutions for Black women, that means that everybody above us also improves. If we can focus on solutions for indigenous women, that means that everybody above us also improves. And I mean, the reason why I focus on Black women is, number one, I am Black. I could be nothing but Black. I was raised in a Black household, and I also think that there's a piece, like a small piece of this, that we have to acknowledge, that there's also anti-Blackness in indigenous communities. Yeah. So it's like there has to be us working together, like, to improve each other. Also knowing that violence against indigenous women is off the charts, right? Missing and murdered indigenous women is off the charts. And I don't want to fight for a liberation of people or be a part of community where there's still going to be anti-blackness.
Right.
So it's like somehow we got to figure out how to work together. And I mean, I told you earlier I had some statistics about violence against black women. So black women comprise about half of female homicide victims, the majority of whom were killed by current or former boyfriends or husbands. Black women are victimized by domestic violence rates at 35% higher than white women. Black women are less likely than their white counterparts to see their sexual assailant penalized, especially if the attacker is white. And another study also showed that men found guilty of raping black women receive shorter sentences than men found guilty of raping white women. And that's like a statistics from now and stuff that we know about the history like of black people on this continent and the way our people are treated, our women are treated.
Thank you. Would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, so I'll give you a really good example of why discussing the abuse of black women is so important to add on to Jasmine. I myself am a survivor. And in additionally to, I could tell you, there is an element of victimhood to white womanhood that isn't assigned to black women. Oftentimes when you go to the police stations or you report it to the police, the answer is always, oh, just block the number. Except you block the number and they show up at your house. They show up at your job. They'll try and get you, this happens quite often, your abuser will try and get you locked up in court and turn the story around on you. And because there is inherent anti-blackness in the justice system, it's believed that you must be the aggressor because, hello, black women are sassy and loud and rude and we fight. So clearly we can never be victims. So that's why it's really important to focus on black women's oppression within the justice system in regards to abuse. And then you also have to look at the community itself. Our own black community has never really seen victimhood in our own selves because of our own internalized misogynoir. We don't see ourselves as victims, so oftentimes when someone else comes to us, we want to keep it quiet because we want to protect the abuser, who's typically of the same race, a black male, or someone of a race that we elevate because of anti-blackness. God forbid it's someone who's white of another race. You're kind of taught, well, you don't want to make things look bad, We're very much aware of the statistics of interracial couples anyway, that they have a high propensity of breaking up. So there's always this shaming of black women. The shaming of speaking out. You're going to make the black man look bad. You're going to make your husband look bad. Don't put your business out there in the street. So there's all these different elements. And then most importantly, when it comes to the subject of abuse and why it can't fit, where we have to focus specifically on black women when we talk about abuse of black women within the feminism scope, is that there is almost always a racialized element of it. I'll give you a classic story. I was at Bodega on South Beach, and I was just minding my own business. I had to stop going to South Beach in general because 2 times I'd been harassed and attacked by someone. The first time I was just eating with my friend, enjoying being single. I was newly single, of course, and all of a sudden, hey, and all of a sudden I hear this woman. I think she was probably a lighter skinned Latina. Scream, oh my God, leave her the fuck alone. Let her eat in peace. Damn, we get it, she's pretty, but let her be alone. So I grabbed my, I'm a black woman, I grabbed my friend like, bitch, what the hell? So, and then I turned and I realized there are 2 men nose to nose with me, staring me down. Like literally we were touching each other's faces. And one was reaching out to touch me. So at that point, we got up to leave. Because I was so frightened to see that this person would be that aggressive as to be that close to me. And it took another woman having to shoo him away in order for him to leave. I go outside, and all of a sudden, and I'm talking to my friend while we're waiting on our Uber, and all of a sudden I see, my friend's like, Leanne, there's someone taking photos of you. I'm like, excuse me? She's like, there's someone taking photos of you. So she points him out, and this strange white man just walks up to me, puts his arms around me, and tries to kiss me while trying to take photos of me. And basically letting me know that he's doing this because I'm a black woman and he clearly has a fetish. And I'm like, no, thank you. I don't even know you. I don't want to be in your photos. To which he then proceeds to tell me, fine, have fun with your nigger babies and your deadbeat baby daddy. So you see, that's why this is so unique to any other conversations about abuse or even feminism, because white women don't have to deal with being called outside of their race as often as we do.
Thank you so much, first and foremost, for sharing that. And so I'm trying to process everything you just said. So let's unpack a little bit about what y'all just said. First of all, first thing that came to mind was I used the term misogynoir. I'm not sure if everybody knows what that means. Do you mind just kind of defining that for us real quick?
Misogynoir is inherent anti-blackness. It is the perception that a black female in particular is embedded in every stereotype. So you take everything from the Jezebel to the bed wench to the mammy, all of the stereotypes, that these are absolutely true, and that these are our experiences and they cannot be shaken. It's also the belief that we're not even really treated as second-class citizens. We're kind of beneath that, just by the inherent nature of our skin tone. So it doesn't matter what you do, it transcends classism, your education, everything. Once you're black, it's more than misogyny. It's anti-black female misogyny.
Yeah. Did you want to add anything?
No, I think that was perfect. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So the combination of misogyny and noir meaning black in French.
Right.
So combination of the two. Thank you. I'm not really sure. Sometimes people aren't familiar with the language, so it's always important to kind of define that. Now, let's continue to unpack this, and please feel free to also unpack with us. So something was said, and I was kind of curious about it, because I forgot who said it, but he said usually abuse happens with someone who is of your particular racial identity.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Now I have not a pushback, but just kind of a question. Now, this could be most likely because, as far as the reason that it's most likely this person, is because we live in segregated neighborhoods, we're raised in segregated areas. So it's not necessarily that something inherent about the black man, because we also don't want to disparage that either, right? Because that can be very dangerous and a slippery slope. But I want to make some clarification on that, maybe, or I'm not sure who said it.
I think it was a combination of kind of both of what we said, because I also gave the statistics that said that 50%, of black women have been abused by an intimate partner, and that partner is more likely going to be black. These are the people that we associate with. More often than not, they're going to be those folks. So I think that's a combination of the criminal justice system and who goes to jail and who doesn't, and who gets to report and who doesn't. So that's also not to say that I don't believe that black men are inherently violent. I don't believe that they're more violent than other people. And I would say that personally, I feel like I have a right to be more outraged and offended at black men. And I say that because it's like, I love black men to no end. Like, I married one, I love him, my dad, my brother, like, I love black men. And I feel like it's almost like, when it's someone in your family, like if you have a wayward sibling in your family, like they might be doing the stuff that all the other kids do, but it's something particular about your sibling acting out towards your mom that's like, I'm super disappointed in you. Like, we were raised better than this. We all love each other. Like, we're in this family together. Like, how can you do this to someone you care about so much? Right? Like, I don't expect a stranger to treat our mom in the same way that I would, like, as one of her children, or that I would expect my sibling to, right? Because that's a stranger. So it feels like in the same breath that so many people are like, don't air our dirty laundry, like, let's keep it in the fit, all this other stuff. I'm also just like, so why can't, like, we have that same level of, like, love when we're talking about the fact that people need to be keeping their hands off each other, and there needs to be a level of accountability if we were to keep it in the family or whatever, which I don't advocate for, because, like, violence is violence no matter who does it, and people should be allowed to speak out about that. So that's my thing about it, is like, I get so much more outrage. Like, I have no expectation that white people are going to treat us in a way that we deserve to be treated after everything that we've been throughout history, with all of the care and love and compassion that we need. I have no expectation for that. But, like, if I'm in the trenches with you every day, like, we're dealing with some of the same oppressions, like, I feel you, and you can still turn around and, like, be so violent towards me, like, there's a special level of, like, outrage and disappointment around that. For me personally.
Sure. Thank you.
So I definitely agree with Jazz. I'm going to be the queen of controversy on this one, because I don't mince words. I don't know how to do that too well. I agree with Jasmine 100%. It's not about this is not black misandry by any concept.
And what is that?
Anti-maleness.
Anti-black.
Anti-black maleness. But there, once again, this boils down to why black feminism, or why we have to put these misnomers on top of these social concepts, is there are unique issues within our community that other communities may or may not experience. Other communities of color may experience it, which is why the element of race kind of gets pushed to the side, and it is a matter of proximity. But there are, when you've been through so many years of oppression globally, there is, and we notice, they've studied this, there is a sense, number one, violence against women is always a matter of proximity. It's whoever's the closest to you and whoever that you can victimize first. That's typically the women that are, and children that are in your own home, because you could do whatever you want and no one's going to say anything if they don't want to say anything. The neighbors won't say anything, you won't call the cops. However, there is also a sense of ignorance and an element of resentment in our community between the genders. I was literally having a conversation.
Say that again. There seems to be a what?
An element of resentment between the genders that stems all the way back to, gosh, should we say that Steve Ryan Monahan report?
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, finish saying what you're saying first, and then maybe right, we can talk about it.
So back in the 60s, and this has been touted 1,000,001 times, there was the belief that if men were out of the home, you could receive welfare, and that is constantly touted as the reason for the divide within the black community. And therefore, it because it is such a pervasive language, it also breeds a sense of resentment and an anger on an already fragile relationship, a relationship that was broken from slavery. So when you add that on top of and a lot of abusers were also abused as children, including men. Men can very much be victims. A lot of black males are victims. So when you add that on top of the element of poverty, the element of race, and then childhood abuse, it creates a cataclysm of just an environment where violence is bound to breed, and that's going to be amongst any community of color, whether it be indigenous people, whether it be Latino people. Anytime
poor white people too,
poor white people as well, poverty. Anytime you put those three together, it's a powder keg just waiting to happen, unless you deal with the underlying issue. So that's why we have to, I'm not going to speak on somebody else's racial ethnic group. I don't want to do that. I want to speak on Latinas. I don't want to speak on anybody else. But just within our community, the language that is touted and passed down, adding fuel to the fire of an already toxic situation because of oppression.
So the only thing that I would push back on is this idea that it started in the 60s.
Yeah.
Because Sojourner Truth, when she said "ain't I a woman," or whatever she said, because there's even controversy around whether she said that in that way, was also a conversation to black men.
Yeah.
Because that was around the time that we were talking about abolition, that we were talking about who gets voting rights and who's eligible, and for years there was a conversation around black men getting voting rights before black women.
Yes.
And then that caused a rift amongst black men and black women, because black women were like, what you mean? Like, and it's almost like this idea that's like, all of a sudden, like, everybody wants access to power. Like,
yes.
Everybody wants access to power from whatever our place of privilege will be, whether it's the language we speak, whether we're able-bodied, our skin color, our sexuality. Like, everybody wants access to some type of power. And with that place of privilege and power, we will oppress people.
Bingo.
So I think that, and that oppression a lot of times looks like wanting access to white people's power. So, and I think that that's a whole different podcast for a whole different day.
Yeah.
But I think, Malcolm X said, like, the most disrespected person, like, the most unprotected person is the black woman. So I think that's why this conversation is so necessary. And I think it's also, I would urge people to even think about it in a bigger scale than just physical violence that's very overt violence, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I like to talk about violence on a spectrum. I remember once I was at a gas station getting some froyo, happy, leaving with my froyo in my hand, in a good mood. This black man opens the gas station door for me and he says to me, "You shouldn't be eating all that." And I was like, wait a minute. Wait a minute. To me, that is on a spectrum of violence. Like, maybe you didn't punch me in the face or slap the ice cream out of my hand, but in that moment, you felt like you had some type of control and ownership over what I can do. As a stranger, I have no idea who you are, but you felt like you could insert yourself into what I eat. Like, and there's been so many other situations of, like, catcalling, of, like, I turn you down and all of a sudden I'm a bitch. Like, I turn you down and all... Right, or you're killed, right? Like that woman that was literally shot in the face. And his defense was, "Oh, I didn't know the gun was loaded." But you still intended to cause some type of violence because you had the gun in her face. Like, you put the gun in her face whether it was loaded or not. Right. Like, all of these situations, or even when I was thinking about this earlier, I thought about music. And I thought about how so much, again, not asserting that hip-hop is any more violent than any other music, but that is the majority of the music that I listen to is like rap on the radio, you know, whatever. And when we talk about like sex in music, it's so violent. Yeah. Like, I'm gonna beat the pussy out, I'm gonna knock your lights out, I'm gonna, you know, even Lil Wayne was under controversy for once, like, comparing sex to what happened to Emmett Till. Right. And had to remove the lyric. Like, even in that, it's like, violence, so much violence. Like, I remember once being out with some friends where a dude tried to hit on a girl and she was like, "I'm here with my boyfriend." The boyfriend was sitting right next to her. The boyfriend was like, "Yo, chill, like, I'm here."
Even the language, trying to hit on her.
Right, trying to hit on her, right. The boyfriend was like, "Yo, chill." All of a sudden, the dude gets hype and the dude is like, "Well, she's a hoe anyway and I'm gonna fight you outside." And I'm like, you try to... It didn't even make sense. Like, what do you mean? Like, let's get in the car, let's go. Like, what are you doing? So maybe you feel like, "Oh, I wouldn't rape someone," or, "Oh, I wouldn't hit a woman," or, "Oh," but like, all of this is on the spectrum of violence that is, I mean, patriarchy that needs to be addressed.
So violence can manifest in different ways.
In so many different, absolutely, in so many different ways.
So a couple of things. So y'all have been sharing just gems, right? But I am curious. So it seemed like at one point you were saying that the Moynihan report was kind of like a starting date for something, and then you talked about Sojourner Truth. So I maybe just a kind of a question. This assumes that there is kind of a homogenous kind of a homogeneity to blackness in the first place. This assumes that there has always been racial solidarity, right? When we think about blackness, or just race as a sociological concept, which that's what it is, it has only really existed for about maybe 400 years, maybe 500 years. So even prior to that, when we were talking about indigeneity earlier, indigenous people, a lot of indigenous activists have talked about how black folks, they see them as displaced indigenous people, because black people were indigenous to what we consider now Africa. And the only reason we call it Africa is because of colonization and the rise of that. And even then, there wasn't this homogenous. People had their own tribes, people went to war, people had slaves, but they didn't conceptualize them as black. Right. They were people with different languages, different customs, traditions. So I always think this is interesting when we kind of talk about how people should act based on a racial identity. And to me, and please feel free to push back, a racial identity, we tend to kind of conceptualize it as like a phenotype. Right. But you might go somewhere, you could have the most melanin in your skin. You could go somewhere outside the United States and be conceptualized as white. By being tied to the United States. Right. So race is such a tricky and messy thing. Right. So a lot of academics that use the term social construct, and that means so many things. But the point is that race is just messy, active, constantly working. I do get what you're saying about the fact that black men have been raised by black women, that they should know not to do this. But I think you pointed out earlier too that oftentimes people who perpetuate violence, they are victims and survivors of violence. Right. And especially in people who are poor, they don't have the access to seek therapists. They don't even know about therapists.
Right.
And there's a lot of good gender work out there, like literature, that part of what it means to be a man means not being a woman, number one, and the way you profess your manliness is through violence.
Yeah.
Right.
And so when we talk about this, I just want to, I guess, point out that black men don't exist in a vacuum. This is a patriarchal thing that is absolutely global, that affects everybody, including women, because women also can uphold patriarchal values the same way that I believe people of color can also be racist. That's also a controversial argument. Systemically, right? Ben Carson, Clarence Thomas, Alex Acosta, people of color who are, to me, fucking racist. Like from a policy standpoint, systemically, and I think individually. But the point is that I just kind of wanted to point that out too, because sometimes that can lead us to disappointment.
Right.
Because you look like me, then you should act a certain way. Like, not necessarily, right?
Well, I mean, of course, because I've been severely disappointed by my
Right.
family members. So absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, absolutely. And I think that we should always keep in mind that we're talking about systems. Like, we're talking about the system of patriarchy. We're talking about the system of class and poverty and things like that. And those systems, more often than not, like, are bearing down on people in similar ways and causing them to react in very similar ways, right? So this is not an individual thing or me saying like all black men are violent,
for
right?
Sure.
Like we're talking about the systems that allow for these behaviors to not only exist but to be deemed as acceptable, to sometimes go without punishment.
Right.
Like we're talking about those types of systems. So it's not necessarily an expectation that like all people will behave the same.
For sure, yeah.
But it's like it's almost saying like the systems allow for, if you behaved in that way, the system will react a certain way.
Right.
Do you see what I'm saying? So like, for example, if we're talking about white men and everything that's going on with Epstein, it's kind of a side note, but it's connected. So like the system allows that if you are a white man that is rich, more often than not, the system is going to support you, it's not going to bear down on you or whatever. Like you don't individually necessarily have to do anything for that system to benefit you.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, white privilege, that's all that. And there's a privilege, there is a privilege to being a man.
Bingo.
Right? There's a privilege to that. I think that privilege gets tricky when we talk about men of color and when we specifically talk about black men, but there is still a privilege in being a man.
The patriarchy.
Right. And that's also not to say that like black men don't have a particular set of oppressions that are also bearing down on them, or that the world is not looking at them
I don't think
as if that they're like
evil
and all of that other stuff. But there's
For
also systems of patriarchy that allow for some of their behaviors that are violent to be acceptable and okay.
Right.
Absolutely. And did you want to add anything?
Yeah, so I'll even give you a classic example of some of those systems. At this current moment, it's been taking me months because it's really hard to talk about abuse being a survivor myself. But I'm working on an article for a popular local publication, and I got a quote from Jasmine, and I also got a quote from Somi Ali from No More Tears. Somi in particular works with immigrant women and immigrant women of color. And she and Jasmine both basically said the same thing, and it mirrors my own experience. Of as you have the triple oppression of being a woman, of being a woman of color, and being an immigrant. So you don't even understand these systems at all as you're trying to get justice and leave this situation. That within itself lends to what Jasmine is saying about the entire system bearing down and making it difficult. And I understand, I agree with Jasmine, and she beautifully expounded upon my point. It works kind of like this. If you're a man of color, you know you're oppressed. So someone above you oppressing you. But now you're frustrated with that oppression. So where do you take this rage and this frustration about something you can't really resolve? And then you add that on to the element of women, and then you add it on to the powerlessness of being an immigrant and feeling like you have no rights. So you create a cataclysm of a perfect victimhood. These are those types of systems that we're talking about. We can break it all the way down of different ways about why proximity to race and gender matters, but that's a clear example there. The lesser you are on the scale, the more likely you're going to be a victim, because you're less likely to talk. You're going to be more afraid to talk.
Right.
So,
and I think something that you said, Hersen, is a good point. About like patriarchy is not just held within like men, right? Like within cis men, because there are trans men that can uphold patriarchy.
The governor of Alabama attempting to pass law regarding abortion.
Right, like it, and right. So absolutely,
yeah.
Right.
And I think also like I want to bring into the conversation like queer families, like there's patriarchy and toxic masculinity, or what people think masculinity should be, and all these different things that can absolutely be upheld in violent ways that, I mean, cis men have the most privilege from, but there, a lot of people also try to benefit from, you know? So I think that was really important, so I want to uplift it that you said that also.
Yeah, thank you. So if you're just tuning in, you walked into a lot. There's a lot going on, a lot is being discussed, and some of the stuff, all this stuff is very messy. I do believe that. I don't think things just kind of work in a kind of unilateral way. This shit is just, I think these things are active, constantly happening for hundreds of years, and we're kind of facing this right now at this particular moment. But trying to bring it back to the abuse of black women. Both of you are black women, identify as black women, work in spaces with women of color, black women. What are some of like, I'm not asking like to share personal information about them, but just like what are some of the things that you kind of see that is just so pervasive that maybe might be different from what you see with maybe white women?
Oh wow, we can go there.
And also not just white women, but also women who are of a particular social class, because you could be a black woman and also be elite, wealthy. You will face patriarchy and racism, but it is a different type of class experience.
Right.
So maybe what's some of the things that you might see in the spaces that you are in?
Right. So I think that the biggest thing that sticks out for me when you ask that question is like the believability. Like
yes, please. Yeah.
Wars have been fought and won over white women's tears.
Yeah.
Right. Like we know that countries have been conquered. Over white women's tears. Like we know that Helena of Troy, the woman who accused Emmett Till, like we know that, right? Compared to what we believe about black women's pain.
Right.
And I feel like even the medical profession, like there's been statistics that have shown that like there are doctors, a mass amount of doctors that do not believe that black people, black women feel pain in a certain type of way.
When you talk about be penalized within the court system while you're in a hospital bed, like accused of being a drug addict, while you are experiencing pain from major surgery.
A woman in Florida was incarcerated, a black woman, and she had to give birth in her jail
right, because they didn't believe her. I mean, my mom works in the ER. She tells stuff like that all the time. There's plenty of videos of pregnant black folks that are saying that they need pain meds, and the nurse is like, you don't need it right now, you're fine. When we talk about maternal mortality, like it's this pattern of people not believing black women's pain and suffering, and thinking that we are literally these invincible people that are superhero, all of this stuff like throughout history. So to me, that sticks out, that like people don't believe us when we come forward and tell our stories. And then if you talk about class, right, like thinking, we work a lot with folks with complicated immigration status, right? So the fact that they are terrified to go to the police. Because what does that mean for like them being able to stay in this country? Right. We're talking about people that are like, which gets into the bill, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. We're talking about people that are like, if I leave, how will I support myself and my children? And when we, again, know that black women in Miami-Dade County are making 63 cents to a white woman's dollar, that almost guarantees a cycle of poverty. And in a space that's like, how am I supposed to get out of this? Like, when you think about how housing costs are out of control, how we're not getting equal pay, the jobs are paying like shit wages, like all of these things are things that people are having to think about when they decide if and how they're gonna leave. So to me, those are like the two biggest things that stand out. When I
and real quick to your point, just like as a point of clarification, especially because we live in a place like Miami, most people think that the immigrant in this country has a face. It's someone who has kind of like my skin tone, who looks like me. But one important thing to address is, especially because we live in Miami, is that black people are also immigrants too. So when we talk about 63 cents to the dollar, I also wonder what it means for black immigrants.
Black immigrants are more likely to be deported than any other immigrant.
This situation last year where people were held up from Sudan, like it was a whole.
Right. So absolutely.
Yeah, especially given our huge just Haitian population here. So just kind of a quick point.
Right. So, and all of these things, like when you talk about the oppressions that are bearing down, like all of these things are also a part of like what makes it hard for someone to leave, and what complicates someone being able to get a divorce, someone being able to take off of work to get a restraining order, and then have to go back to get the final restraining order. Like the justice system also is not helpful in making it easy for survivors to come forward and say I've been harmed.
Especially when we see these immigrant kind of families. Especially people coming from the Caribbean and Latin America, where the woman is forced to stay at the house to be a mother of the children, and the man is the provider. And then oftentimes the man is the one who ends up learning English, and oftentimes will stop the wife from learning English, form of manipulation.
Yes.
So, and all this shit that's why there's so many just levels and spectrums to the way just oppression works, and it's constantly at work. So, yeah.
I feel like I'm gonna end up being the person with all the scary stories, but I'll give you to add to that point. And speaking in terms of systems and our privileges, oftentimes these women may marry men of legal status or American-born men, and particularly within the black community, that is where you see a lot of abuse, because what they will do is unfortunately, you're not supposed to do it. It is illegal. People will marry for status. That is the agreement. It is an agreed upon terms. Everyone understands what's going to happen. Then when it comes time to actually filling out the paperwork, they use their American status and the marriage as a means to oppress the victim. And that goes across both men and women. I have several family members that have been in those situations. I'll even give you, without telling too much, I'll even give you an example. I have a relative whose daughter, she's very old and very sick. Her daughter is married to an American-born black male, and they don't even live far apart. She has to hide visiting her own mother, and she cannot send any type of financial support for her mother, who is suffering from a debilitating disease, lupus. And this is a very old woman. She's got to be in her 80s now, 70s or 80s. And she cannot work. She cannot do anything. And she has no choice but try and find a way to work, because her daughter can't support her. Her daughter physically cannot see her unless she sneaks around. And so the abuse is coming from the husband towards the daughter, and then the husband's also abusing the mother. So you see how these systems all play together, and the believability, even at her age, her elderly age, no one's really going to believe this little old Jamaican woman is going through all of this. No one's. The first answer that you always get as an abuse victim is a black abuse victim is, well, why can't you just leave? Why can't anyone just leave an abusive situation? You think if that was so easy, there would be no women dead. We'd all just block them from our lives, and that would be the end of it. Unfortunately, that's not the case. And then speaking of believability in my own case, I've been fighting for almost 3 years now with an abusive partner. When I went to file a restraining order, this individual and his new girlfriend used his privilege as a black male and as a business owner and as a popular local DJ for him and the girl to lie and file one against me. And I ended up getting it because I didn't know enough. Even growing up in the court system, I didn't know enough about what to do. So I just showed up at court to explain, I just received this at my door just a few hours ago or a day ago. I don't know. They told me to come here. And these two individuals lied because although she is a black female, she's not, how do I put this? She's very much savvy in how to present herself as being akin to a white woman in white woman's tears. You could tell she grew up she grew up around more white people. So she knew how to kind of play and game the system against a black woman who's much more stronger, much more assertive. So who does the court believe? although her story was ridiculous and I had more than enough evidence to prove that she was the aggressor in the situation, they believed her. So now these people not only does she now have my address, but she has my workplace. She has everything that the court needed from me in order for her to file that. And what does she do throughout the year? Continuously harass me.
So I am kind of, because part of the show is kind of to learn, right, about a lot of these things, especially for myself. So you said something about he uses, as a man, used black privilege, as black male privilege for this. So I am kind of careful, like, with this term privilege, right? Because I think it has become very much like a buzzword these days. Or this person, they're tall, so they have the privilege to reach something on top of the refrigerator,
right?
Right. So sometimes not everything is directly a causation of a racial identity.
Yes. And
we also have to be, I think, careful, because now we're policing this other woman's blackness, right? So that can also be dangerous, because she grew up this way, and these are assumptions that we're making, number one. And the other part is that blackness can mean a plethora of things, and because someone experienced blackness in a type of way doesn't mean someone else can't experience blackness in a completely different way.
I should probably say she used her classism. Her privilege was hinged on classism, on a certain level of classism. She knew how to present her, and this happens oftentimes. Even in the original R. Kelly case, one of the reasons why the juror, who was actually a white immigrant male, older male, he said that he did not believe the victim in the original R. Kelly case was because he didn't like the way she dressed and he didn't like the way she spoke. Keep in mind, these are poor black women from poor communities. And not even women, they're little girls. I don't expect much of them. But the idea that how you present yourself in the midst of poverty makes you less believable in court, despite an actual videotape would actually allow someone to dismiss you as a victim. These little things, and that's where we also talk about women upholding the patriarchy and having a little bit more understanding despite their race. And I agree with you on that. Sometimes it's not about race. Sometimes it's about class. Sometimes it's about gender. Sometimes it's pretty privilege. You may know that you can get away with certain things because you're more attractive or because you present a certain way. So it's I agree with you on that one, but I'll let you finish.
Did you want to say something?
I thought about something related to your original question. So I don't know if you want. Another thing that you talked about, what is like impacting all of this and like kind of like what's leading to it, and I thought about religion. Religion upholds a lot of the patriarchy. Religion upholds a lot of the patriarchy, and the way people use religion, specifically Christianity, because I'm a preacher's kid. Yikes. Grew up in church every single day. I know my dad, my grandfather. I got uncles that are pastors. We were churchy, like Monday through Sunday. We were in church. And when I think about like the ways that I was raised to be like, women aren't supposed to pray in church. Women are supposed to always wear skirts, like never pants in church. Like women, it was like women aren't supposed to have any type of leadership roles in church. And thankfully, like under my dad's leadership, it's kind of gone away from that, like where it's not so strict. But I also remember like growing up in my house, I really wanted to play the drums, and my dad was like, ladies don't play the drums. Right. So like different things like that religion upholds the system of the man is the head of the household, and wives, submit yourselves to your husband, like
views on LGBTQ,
all of this that adds to this idea that's like, and again, heterosexual couples, but then even queer couples, if we relate it to masculinity and femininity, and not just man and woman, like the feminine, the woman is like subservient to the man.
And queer couples can definitely be Christian too, right?
Absolutely. So, I think religion is like a big one that upholds.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And I wouldn't say that So again, we're talking about the spectrum, right? Like, I'm not saying that religion is advocating for like physical violence against your partner, but it's advocating for this. It's advocating for this spectrum of violence that like keeps people.
Yeah, I like how you said that, spectrum of violence. Yeah.
I would even say if we take the faith element out of religion, patriarchy is almost a religion within itself. The way we're so committed to it.
Someone asked the other day, what do they say? Is there some good in patriarchy? Mm-hmm. And I was like, that's really interesting because I like having my door open. Right. I like flowers. It's an interesting, really deep conversation. That's also like, if you take the patriarchy out of it, like, this is my duty as a man, like, and if you think about the places where these things have come from. Like, there's stories that said that, the door was open because they thought women were weak. Like, and I don't know about the truth of that, but it sounds believable according to the patriarchy. So thinking about things like that, it's also like, maybe having my door opened, if you think that, like, that's a definition of your masculinity, is not that nice anymore.
Right.
It doesn't feel that great anymore. Like, I want to know that we can do that for each other. Like, this is our partnership together. If you get to the door first, open it. Like, if I get to the door first, I'm not going to stand there and wait for you. Like, I can also show you that, like, I'm here.
That's so interesting. I would love to see it, like, having a day for, like, women open the door for men. Because in the sense, because from an experiment perspective, because I do think that a lot of men, like, if it was like an explicit, hey, here you go, I do think in many ways it would it would reveal, like, their kind of perspectives on what it means to be a man. Right. There's really a lot of good literature on gender stuff, and where this author talked about homophobia, and he said that homophobia, the way he was defining it, was that it is not being scared or being frightened by someone who is a gay man, but being caught not being man enough.
Right.
By another man.
Right.
So let's say a man sees that a woman's opening a door for you, and they're like, oh, he's not a man because he can't open his own door. Now all of a sudden, my masculinity kicks in. It's like, yo, nah, I can open the door for myself, and that so that ends up being homophobic according to this particular author. Really interesting.
That's really interesting because I think, even though that's kind of tangential, I think it really relates because it's almost like a one-up on the masculinity. Mm-hmm. Like, which is like pump some of the violence. Like, it's like a one-up type of thing. Like, I gotta be bigger, I gotta be badder than you. And I think at this point, part of it is also self-preservation. Like, I've talked to Asa about this before. Like, Asa loves to dance. Like, Asa, most people would probably think I'm the most, like, free, reckless person in our house. Asa is the dancer out of the two of us. Mm-hmm. And it's beautiful to watch him dance because he's so free with his body. But there's certain spaces that we go into that he won't dance because he's like, I have to be more cautious of who's around me, because if I dance in the ways that I do at home, like, people are going to assume a thing about, like, who I am, and then come try you and come try me, and then before you know, everybody's getting tried, now there's a fight. So it's like, even this idea that, like, patriarchy is eating away at men. Yeah. It's eating away at men too, and y'all's ability to be free.
Absolutely.
And y'all's ability to truly show up for a partner and love a partner and love the people around you.
Even just be there for just another man.
Right.
I'm actually thinking about hosting an event called where we do manis and petties just for men. Because I posted something about, don't let toxic masculinity stop you from getting mani petty.
Right. Oh yes.
They're amazing.
Right.
We're not doing Smeagol toes in 2019.
Right. But I think one thing, we've been talking about power throughout this conversation in a very kind of structural way. Mm-hmm. So we've been addressing institutional forms of power, whether it's racism, patriarchy, heterosexism, whatever it is. But power can also operate in different ways. And a lot of my research kind of stems around the way that power isn't everything.
Right.
Because power is relational. So if we take the example of Asa going to a space, right, and he stops dancing, not because anyone told him something necessarily, right? It was something that he felt at that particular moment by people's views, by maybe certain musics, maybe certain spaces, maybe certain neighborhood, geography, whatever it was. Power just operated on your own body to stop you from doing something. Like, I'm a salsa dancer. And in salsa communities, it's very common to see two men dancing together. Right. So I dance with my homeboys all the time, like turns and everything. and I'll go to certain spaces and then stop myself from dancing with my homeboys, even though my boy might be better than every woman dancer there. I stop myself because all of a sudden I start thinking, oh shit, I'm still as much as I care about these issues, I think as much as everybody cares about these issues, we're all still dealing with our homophobias, with our racisms, with our misogynies, and all this stuff. It is constant work. So I just kind of wanted to point that out too, that power can also operate in different ways. We got to talk about your bill because we're running out of time. Please, you've been doing amazing work.
So through my work at the Miami Worker Center this past legislative session, with Representative Dottie Joseph and Senator Audrey Gibson, we were able to have HB 563 signed into law, and what this is provides for unemployment compensation for survivors of violence.
This is amazing.
So Florida was one of 9 states in the country that did not have it. So when you go to file for unemployment, there's certain things that qualify you to be able to get unemployment, to receive unemployment. Domestic violence was not one of them. So if you are forced to leave your job because you feel unsafe, because you've been threatened, because you've been harassed, so like something outside of you is making you unsafe, or even making your coworkers unsafe, you could not get unemployment benefits. Like you'd be stuck on your own, you've quit your job, you've left, or whatever. This law now makes it so that violence is just cause for you to be able to leave your job and receive unemployment benefits.
That is amazing.
So we became the 42nd state to sign this into law. It's huge. Like that changes the conditions for so many people that are worried about how I'm going to survive. And I mean, unemployment is not your full paycheck. We know that, but it's something. It is something that doesn't leave you with nothing when you're forced to leave an abuser. And I mean, it's a benefit to an employer. Like if you don't want an abuser showing up at your job, like at your place of work or your place of business, like this is something that also keeps other employees safe. So it was amazing. I think one of my favorite parts about the bill, there's 2 things. One, it was primarily sponsored by 2 really dope black women. So again, when black women when black women are leading, like there's transformational work that can come out of it. So 2 dope black women, and this provided us the opportunity to see so many people share their stories of survival for the first time. Find hope for the first time, and be at the center of this conversation, right? So Tallahassee's so far away that it'd be easy for us to just go up there, do our job, nobody knows what we're doing. But we were constantly taking people up there that were survivors of violence to tell their stories and to tell how this bill impacted them. Folks that said, I never was brave enough to leave my abuser because he told me I would have nothing. He was the one working. Like, I didn't know what to do. Like, or he would come to my job. There was one woman that said that she started a new job. Her abuser showed up at her job. She quit the next day. She was there for 1 day because she was so terrified that he would know where she was every day and come back. So this is something that provides a little bit of a safety net and shows that, you know, in one more step, we're on the side of survivors of violence.
That's amazing.
So yeah, and
Thank
I mean,
you for all
when we
the
talk,
work you do.
this is, I mean, it's huge. And when we talk about like what this could do for black women, we talk about poverty, like all of these things meshing together, this changes the conditions for so many people to know this is available. Like this is one more thing to help you leave, like to support you in leaving.
That is absolutely amazing. Amazing. So you could, if you are being abused, it has to be in the workspace?
No. So it doesn't have to be in the workspace. The way the bill is written is like if you are in fear of like stalking or harassment or things like that, that you are in fear that they might come to your job. And one thing that we were worried about, and we were grateful that we were able to we with the rep on the language. We were worried about like if it said you have to provide a police report, you have to do things like that. So there's like different ways to show proof that's not just a police report.
Awesome.
Right? Because we know that people are scared to go to the police, right? There's different ways to show that proof. And it also allows for you to be able to go to your employer and say, hey, this is what's going on. And for the employer to try to either shift you to another place or another department or whatever. And if that doesn't work, like you can qualify.
That is absolutely amazing. That is, That is absolutely amazing. Thank you so much. Because it is the work of grassroots organizers.
Right. Absolutely. It literally came out of a conversation. So people have been working on this for over 10 years. And then it was revitalized recently through a group called Sisterhood of Survivors, and then revitalized even more recently when Representative Joseph had a couple conversations with community folks and were like, what can I do to help? And this came out of that conversation, which is, I mean, shameless plug, elections matter.
No,
Like,
to
have a representative that will come to you as a community person and say, how can I help the people that you're working with, is huge.
Yeah.
And this bill came,
So this was born out of Miami.
Yes. So this bill was born out of a Miami legislator who fulfilled a promise from her campaign trail, from a conversation of what can I do to help.
And this is so interesting when we talk about who gets elected into office, and when we talk about, again, just racism, like, writ large, like, there are people, like, in small, like, middle-ass nowhere, Florida, white women, right, who also benefit from this, as they should.
Right.
And they'll probably never know.
Right.
That it was the grassroots work of black women, women of color.
That hustled this
bill.
When I tell you hustled, hustled this
You said
bill.
taking people back and forth to Tallahassee, and that's far as fuck.
I remember at one point we were so your bill goes to a Senate committees, a bunch of committees. It gets to a signed committee. If your bill is on an agenda in a committee and they don't get to it in that committee, your bill can die. So like if it's fifth on the agenda, they only get to 4 and they're out of time, like your bill can die.
Wow.
So we were in one committee. There was 1 minute left. Leader Gibson presented the bill in 30 seconds. They voted on it in 30 seconds and kept the bill alive. When I tell you hustled to keep this bill alive and to make sure it passed, like, it's phenomenal work that we have to support good legislators, and particularly, in my opinion, black and brown legislators, the ones that are on our side, and more particularly black women legislators, because they're up there catching the brunt of, like, the craziness. And they are hustling.
They're being abused too in different racially profiled in certain spaces. As much as I hate Obama, just political reasons, he's the only president to ever been racially profiled in the White House.
What they're doing to Kamala, which really like her too.
I hate her too.
But the fact that people are questioning her blackness, questioning whether she was born here, like
the type of racial profiling, right? So we're gonna have episode 2 on representatives and people running for office, because that's important too. So we're running out of time. We have like 3 minutes left. Anything y'all would like to share before we bounce, before we leave?
I think the whole reason why this whole conversation sparked in the first place was about speaking of Kamala Russell case. So as you guys know, Kamala Russell was the young black female teacher or counselor who was found murdered, whose body was found at the side of a canal in Miami Gardens. I want everyone to keep track of this case, keep watching, keep pushing. I'll definitely keep pushing for legislation to protect her. Jasmine, you know, I'm one call, I'm always down for you. And I want to thank Jasmine personally, because her bill affects me. I understand completely what it's like having someone show up at your job and feeling like you have to leave. So, and I also want people to do their own research about what's really going on in our community. I hear so much misinformation about what we see as believability of black women, especially surrounding the whole R. Kelly case and Kamala Russell and everyone else. So do your own research, ask plenty of questions. You can contact me at @getit_Lily.
And I tagged both of them in the promo video today, so please feel free to follow them.
I think, I mean, so my biggest thing and my biggest learning over the past few years since I've been woke is like, I feel like it's almost like creating a blank slate. Like you mentioned, so many socializations, so many things that we've been taught that you just constantly have to question and re-question and like make an effort to divest from. And I think violence and patriarchy and all of these things are those things. I feel like, I mean, so many, I don't know. I feel like it's just so deep what is being fed into cis men about what masculinity is and the expectations of them, that people need to reevaluate. Like, ask yourself, what does it mean to be a man? And then when you break that down and you realize that all of those traits are not anything that's exclusive to cis men, like everybody can inhabit the traits of protecting, provide, whatever, and break it down that way and like redefine your identity outside of those very rigid terms for masculinity.
And also extending that to women, because
yes.
over 85% of teachers K through 12 are women. 82% are white women, actually. So when you have 82% of white women, sociologically speaking, I'm not making any truth claims, I'm saying sociologically, that people have these certain biases, whether they're racial, gendered, and from, pre-K, you'll be like, hey, do you like her as a little boy? You're already being forced, that heterosexuality being imposed on you. So these things are constantly at play. So yeah, we should all be questioning